Last time, we looked at how to pass arguments to your Riverpod providers. But in this video, we are going to look at how to perform side effects in Riverpod. But first, we need to revisit the last video and do some refactoring. Remember the last time we were able to pass in business to our provider to be able to fetch business podcast here. But here we can see that we are repeating a couple of things. So what I'm thinking is we can refactor this podcast section so that we just only pass in the genre that we want it to fetch, and the fetching will be done within that session, so it makes it a little bit cleaner. So we go to our podcast section, and then we make sure to, in this widget, we make sure to create a new file. We call it podcast section .dart, and we're just gonna extract the podcast section here into the file. Okay, there are other ways that could make this faster, but so far this works. And so we are gonna import material and then the search result and the podcast item here, and we hit and save, and then we can literally just import it here. But that's not all. We want to make sure that the fetching is done right within this section, and then we can do consumer widget. Just turn it to a consumer widget. What it means is that we need to pass in a widget ref and ref here. Okay, so that is good. But here we are requiring the title. Do we want the title to be the category? I think not. So we can just do final string genre, which is literally our category. And then we can make it require this just dot genre. Okay. And now we want all the fetching to be done here. So we are gonna do final and get genre ref, and it's gonna be ref.watch get category provider, which we are going to import. And then the category will be the genre that we have passing through the constructor here. And then we can do return get genre ref dot when, and we have access to the data, the error, or whatever. But simply we can just copy it right from here and just paste it back here. So now we have that when, and it's gonna return, when there's a success, it's gonna return a column. So let's cut that, put a semicolon here and return the column instead. And then we save and we go back here, and the only thing we are going to be putting here now is the podcast section. And we just put in the podcast section, but it needs a genre, and the genre will be, and if you don't pass in anything, it's going to be empty. But for now, let's make it empty. But here, the podcast sections require a result. So we're just going to delete it here, remove it here, because we don't need it anymore. And because it's going to be using the result from the data here. And then we can save and we can remove results. And the same thing here. Let's copy that. And then we're going to put it here. And we remove the result and the genre. Okay, so before we move forward, let's edit this a bit. We don't want the genre to be required because we don't have to pass it. So we are going to make this string nullable here. And here in the get category provider, you see, if you go back here on the home notifier, it needs us to pass it. But if you don't pass it, it's gonna be empty. So for now, we can say genre is equals to empty. So if you don't pass it, it's gonna be empty. So that solves that problem for us. So here we don't need to pass it here because we just getting it trending. But here we can pass in the genre to be business. And we can remove this because we don't need it anymore. And then we have successfully refactored our podcast section. And then you can repeat this, and you can see that it's easy to repeat. So let's say we want a new category that is religion. We just simply need to pass in the genre. I'm not sure if it's going to be capital, but let's see. And then we have added a new genre here. Okay, now let's go over to looking at how to perform side effects in our Flutter apps. So what is exactly a side effect? According to Wikipedia, which I don't like to link, but it sort of gives a meaning to what side effects are. So in computer science and operation, it's said to have a side effect is if it modifies some state variable outside of its local environment. So what do we mean by modify? So basically you want to mutate some state variable. So you want to change some state outside of its local environment. So how do you do that in Riverpod? Okay, so we can do that using a notifier. And you can simply just define a notifier by adding a Riverpod annotation on a class. So adding it on a class will make you able to perform side effects on the provider itself. Okay, so let's look at an example of what we want to do. For example, I've made on our podcast item, I've added a stack and actually just added a position to have all this icon. So the idea is when I see a podcast, I want to click on this icon and it's supposed to like and then add it to a list of favorite items, podcasts that are favorited. So when I click on this, it should send it to a list of favorite podcasts that I like. So let's go to our providers here. And inside the providers, I'm going to create, not really, but we will have a new provider that we call favorite provider. So this is a provider that is gonna be a provider that exposes all our favorite podcasts. So let's go back to our documentation. So basically, this is what we need to do. So I'm going to copy that and put it. And then we need to import the Riverpod annotation. So instead of my notifier, we're going to give it favorite notifier. And it's going to extend, you add this underscore and a $sign. And we want it to return a list of string. So the list of string will be a list of track ID, because each podcast item has a unique track ID. So when I like a podcast, I just add it to the track ID, add the track ID to a list, and then we're good to go. So now you can create methods that we basically add a track ID. You can see you can add the track ID, and then this is how you mutate the states. There is a state on this notifier, and you can just say equals to, you create a new list, and it's going to add the ID to the list. So let's run our build runner again so that it will remove all this error. So that run, build runner, watch. I think you're making a mistake. We need to put in the path file. So it's gonna complain because it doesn't have a path file. So it's gonna be favorite underscore provider. Okay, and then we save that. And we have favorite notifier for notifier, which we shouldn't have. Okay, so now for the build, by default, it's gonna return an empty string because we don't have any item that we have saved. So let's save that. And then now this method is what is gonna mutate the states. It's gonna perform the side effect. So anytime we want to add, we like something, we're just gonna call in the add method to add in the ID. So let's go to this podcast item, and we can do ref.read. This time you're gonna do read. You're not watching anything, so you're gonna do a read. And then we can do favorite notifier provider. If you go to the generated file, you have to see, and then you just put it here and you import. But here you must do that notifier. So when you do that notifier, you are telling it that I'm notifying that provider that I want to perform a method, a side effect on it. And which side effect do you want to do with method? You want to call .add. What am I adding? I'm adding item.track ID. Okay, so the track ID is int. So we can, so apparently we need to make it a list of integers. So this is gonna be, we're just adding an integer. Okay, so also we can do if the track ID, which I don't think it's not equals to null. We do this this thing. Okay, so now anytime we click on the item here, it's gonna just add the track ID to the favorite provider, notifier provider. Okay, but how do we know if each item is part of the list? So in that case, I'm gonna create a new provider. You can do it in the same file, but you can do favorite podcast provider .dart. This is going to be a method that basically tells you if a podcast has been added to the list of favorite provider. So I'm going to say we can go here and just copy this. Here is not gonna be a feature. Here is gonna be a boolean, and we can do favorite podcast, and then here it's gonna be favorite podcast ref. Now here we are gonna read favorite notifier provider. We're going to read the state of the favorite notifier provider, and then we are going to get all the favorites. But here we need to pass in a track ID. So when we pass in a track ID, then we'll now check, does the track ID exist in the favorites? If it does, then it's going to return true. Yeah, so favorites, the state that contains track ID is going to return both true or not. So let's save that. And we are going to import Riverpod annotation, and we gonna put in our path file, and it's gonna be favorite _ podcast provider. So it's gonna be favorite contains track ID because this just returns a list. So, and then we save that. And let's go back to our podcast item. So in here, instead of just doing false here, we will just do ref.watch, and it's going to be favorite podcast provider. And we'll pass in the item.track ID. And if it's empty, it's going to be 0. And then we do .data. I'm not sure if there's .data there. .value. Okay, so we can do .value and then false. So you can see we call in the favorite podcast provider. We pass in the item, the track ID. And if it does not, it's going to be just false. And then we're just going to save that. And so let's go here. Is favorite. If it's favorite, it won't be an outline. If it's favorite, it will just show you. If it's not, it will be outline. So, okay, so let's try here. So I want to add this. Let's see. Yeah. Now I've added a print statement here. Now, when we click on the add, we can see that it is changing. Apparently, remember here, we need to not just read because it's going to be called once. So anytime we add, we want to watch for new changes. So that is why when it is read, it's not going to be working. But here, we're going to be putting watch here. And let's reload. And you can see when we click on here, you can see it changes. And in our print statement, you can see that we have added a track ID here. And every time you add, you can see it's added. Now, an assignment for you, you can see that we can only add, and each time you add, it's going to be adding to this list. So you can put a remove here also, such that if you click on add and it already exists, it's going to just remove it from the list. So you can add a method and then call the method here and do a bit of a logic here. So, but the goal of this video is to tell you how to do side effects in Riverpod. Let's do a quick recap of what we have built. So we've added a like, a favorite icon here, and each time we click on it, it's going to show that it's favorite. Okay, but let's look at our provider again. So we have favorite podcast provider. We made a mistake here because the favorite notifier provider is not async, so there's no reason why we should return a feature here. Okay, so that means we need to remove this async keyword here, and we're gonna hit save. And let's do that run build rather watch again. Now our podcast item has an error because it has data which we don't want. So it's basically just return a list and not a feature. And we hit save and let's run it again. We should be fine. Yes, and we are fine. Okay, so here is how you can do side effects in Flutter. Notice that we added a Riverpod keyword on a notifier, on a class, to give it a notifier. You can do the same for an async notifier as well. If your build method returns a feature, it's gonna become an async notifier. So I look forward to the next video, and I'll see you.